up? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame. It is Thursday, August the 21st, and we have an alert situation with the Bills. Now, I couldn't decide if it was a yellow alert or a red alert or an orange alert, so I just did yellow and orange kind of together there behind me. Hope you guys are okay with that. So here's the alert. Let's get into it right now. We talk about the alert, talk about Josh Allen not playing in the preseason finale, Keon Coleman getting some praise from his teammates, and a big deal for racing in Western New York. Watkins Glen's schedule totally changed. I got an expert coming in that I think you'll recognize and I know you'll enjoy hearing from. But let's get to the alert status situation for the Bills. Trey White today left the final practice before the preseason game in Tampa Bay with a leg injury. Let me tell you exactly what Sal Capaccio, our good buddy from Bills Kickoff Live, tweeted today. Sal said regarding the injury that Trey hopped off the field on one leg, which I kind of found funny because you don't hop off the field on two legs. You hop off the field on one leg. Either way, hopped off the field on one leg. Trainers immediately were there. Trey was at the outside wall of the stadium. Now, that's one important thing to realize about what happened today. The Bills were practicing in Highmark Stadium, not over at the practice facility. That'll come up again a little later on. According to Sal, Trey was standing by the outside wall being attended to by trainers for several minutes. He then walked slowly on his own, but with the trainer right there, up the tunnel, later came back down the tunnel towards the field, and then got in a cart and was driven off. I think I got the impression from reading a few other posts on X that perhaps Tre'Davious White was watching practice on the cart for a little while, but either way, the cart took him away. Now, look, number one, I know people hear like cart and they think, oh, the worst thing ever. Trey is not going to be back all year. He's done. And obviously with Trey White, there's a history there. We'll get to that in a minute too. I want to say this. In training camp, when you hear player carted off, it does not have the same absolute indication of a terrible injury that it would during a game. For one major reason. In every single game, in every single NFL stadium, the locker room and the medical facilities are like right over there. So if you as a player can't make it from the sideline to those facilities, it's because there's a serious issue going on and you require a cart. And obviously also in part because there's a game happening, and not to sound insensitive, but the league wants to keep going with the game. So if you need to reach those facilities and it's going to take you a while, you need a cart. But in other words, the cart happens in a game because it's a serious enough situation that a player can't make it a short distance in a reasonable amount of time. In a practice setting, in training camp, well, the locker rooms could be way the heck 500 yards that way or around in the next building. Or like what happened today with Trey White, the locker rooms were across the parking lot in the field house because the Bills are practicing in the stadium, but they're not using the locker facility in the stadium. During the week, they use the practice locker facility. So Trey White needing to be carted off could easily be precautionary because the walk from the locker room, from the stadium to the field house locker room is long. It's hundreds of yards. So, and then on top of that, the tunnel itself is kind of pitched, uphill a little bit. It's not like walking around San Francisco, but it is definitely not flat. So another thing that could exacerbate something that's minor. So the fact that Trey White was carted off, not a big deal. Don't get overly bent out of shape about that. Now, the thing with Trey White, of course, is that with the history he's had, an Achilles and a knee ligament situation, there's a worry that, re-injury would be more likely. I don't know if necessarily that is medically accurate, but certainly the worry is there. And let me tell you, number one, and someone pointed this out, one of the Bills fans that I follow on X pointed this out today, how gutted you feel for Trey if this is a serious injury. Because one of the best parts of training camp this year, not just the way Trey White has played, but how much he's enjoyed it, how much he's smiled, how much he's had fun. This was Trey White circa his rookie year, his second year when, he was the life of the party. He was, happy to, exchange a joke. You saw him on Hard Knocks a couple days ago, just kind of shooting the bull with Max Hairston between a drill in Chicago. It has been fun to see Trey White at this version of Trey White. And to have this happen to him again, if it is serious, would be a big time downer. Absolutely. Now, look, it sounds bad. Is it bad? I don't know. It's still early. Like I said, don't get bent out of shape with the cart part of this. We'll see what happens in terms of how he's evaluated. It was good that he was able to walk off under his own power. That's better what Max Hairston had a few weeks ago when he left the practice and had to be, really helped into the training tent next to the practice field. So this is concerning. It's certainly not good. Is it the worst report ever? No. I think there's optimism that he could be okay, but it's going to be a while before we figure these things out. So let's talk about, what do the Bills do now? So if Trey White is not available, you've already got your likely hope for starter at corner number 2, Max Hairston, who's out with a leg injury. And he just got on a bike for the first time, that at least the media saw, on Tuesday. So this does not sound like a guy who's going to be ready in 2 weeks and change for the Ravens on September the 8th. Maybe, but it doesn't seem that way. Now, if Trey White's not ready, now you're already down to your 4th corner to be a starter. And look, right off the bat, before we even get into who the 4th corner is, who's going to have to play, that ain't good. There's no team in the NFL that looks at their depth chart and says, you know what? I wouldn't mind if our corner number 4 here starts. I think we'd be fine. Maybe some teams will. No one wants that. So if the Bills are already down to their 4th option as a starting corner, that's not good. That being said, here's your silver lining. And I think there's a pretty decent one here. Number one, Dane Jackson as a number 4 corner has a fairly high floor. This is a guy who's been in the system. He knows where to be, what to do. He's familiar with everything, and he's a solid player. I know there are some people that don't quite enjoy his type of play, his style, his level of play. I think he's been a pretty respectable corner in the NFL for a long time. And if the Bills have to go with him, you could certainly do worse. There's no doubt about that. All right. Number 2, there are at least some options. Dorian Strong, the guy they drafted this year, someone a lot of us were excited about as a later round pick. He has not impressed enough to where I'd say, give that guy a look against the Ravens. But there is the potential for a player with athletic ability to be a part of the equation for week 1. Number 2, Jamarcus Ingram's still here. And unlike Dorian Strong, Jamarcus Ingram's had a pretty solid camp. Ingram probably had the best defensive play at camp with an interception he made on a seam ball to Zach Davidson about midway through at Fisher. And like Dane Jackson, Ingram has been around the block. He knows the system. He knows where to be. He knows what to do. So when it comes to your 4th corner, having to go that far down the depth chart, if that's what the Bills are looking at for week 1, things could be worse. Now you might come back with, hey, Thad, did you see the Bears game? The reserve team didn't look very good in that game. I get it. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and sell you that if it's Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, that Lamar Jackson won't spend the whole game drop back and saying, what side is Dane on? I'm going that way. And it's not even a knock on Dane Jackson. That's more of a Christian Benford thing. But yeah, obviously the Bills would be in a tough spot. And we'll have to see if the Sean McDermott, Bobby Babich coaching tree, which is long been credited as being some sort of defensive back whisperer for good reason, can get good enough play out of that group that if Trey White and Max Hairston can't go, that the Bills can get by for a week or 2. I will say, bottom line, I really hope that Trey White doesn't have something super serious. If it's a couple weeks, if it's some sort of sprain, he comes back in early October, whatever, fine. But that guy having to deal with a season-ending type injury for the 3rd time in 5 years, that's just not fair. I mean, that's like, I'm not going to wish that on my worst enemy type stuff. And absolutely not a guy like Trey White, who has generally been pretty beloved, not only by the fans, but by those of us in the media. He's a great guy to get along with. And this version of him that we've seen this year, the reborn, happy, excited one, it's been super fun. So I really hope that guy is going to still be a part of this team, going forward. Now, speaking of a part of the team, the Bills, again, are getting ready for their last preseason game of the year. It's day after tomorrow in Tampa. And Sean McDermott met with the media today. Did not know how much the starters would play in general, but he did say that Mr. Josh Allen will not be playing in the season finale. So this is the first time, or the preseason finale. This is the first time that Josh Allen will go a whole preseason without playing at all. And I've got no problem with this. I've been saying for years, why is Josh playing in the preseason? I mean, I get it. Understand Sean McDermott wants to get reps. The first year with Connor McGovern, I can understand, new center, that kind of thing. Maybe new coordinator. The Bills have had that. Not this year, but previous years. So there's understandable reasons for Josh Allen playing. But I've never felt like that he's a guy that needed to get any sort of snaps in the preseason. And that playing him in the preseason, the risk is not worth the reward. Especially now in the era of everybody gets a joint practice. I mean, you get as much work done in those joint practices as you will in 15 snaps in a preseason game. So while this is brand new for the Bills and Josh Allen, I don't have much of a problem with this. I think it's the right move. I think the Bills will be just fine. Now, the question becomes, with Josh Allen not being a part of this, are the Bills going to be ready for that opener against the Ravens? And I've seen a number of Bills fans, and I've even talked to some of them, who look at this Ravens game as a monster game, as a season-defining game. People have already said this game could be for the 1 seed. And it might be. Obviously, I think if you look at the AFC, I think the Chiefs are down a little bit. I think the division is way up, which is going to make it tougher for the Chiefs to stack wins. I think that the two teams that have the best chance to be the 1 seed in the AFC are the Bills and the Ravens. So obviously, you want to win a head-to-head game with them, and especially if that game is going to be home. I mean, if you want to think about this game being for the 1 seed, well, the 1 seed, the whole point of it is to have home field advantage. Well, you have home field advantage in the game that determines home field advantage. You want to win those things. But that means being ready for those things. And if Josh Allen doesn't play in the preseason, on top of the fact that receivers not named Keon Coleman have been, in and out like a merry-go-round so far this preseason, will the Bills be ready to go? And my answer to that is don't worry that much about the opener. I know it looks like a big game. I know it sounds like a big game. Bills, Ravens, Sunday night. Keep in mind that the Bills have beaten the Chiefs the last 4 seasons. And in 3 of those years, Buffalo would have or did go on the road to play the Chiefs in the playoffs anyway. You don't know when the big games are going to happen. Yeah, it looks like that game might be a big one, but what the Bills have done the last 4 years is that their big games haven't been against the Chiefs or the Ravens or whoever else is the power flavor of the year in the AFC, the Bengals a couple times. For the Bills, the big games have been the dumb ones they've lost. And if you don't remember, let me refresh your memory. 9-6 to the Jags in November. Minnesota on the late quarterback sneak fumble in the end zone. The Jets, Zach Wilson a couple different times. Denver and Russell Wilson on Monday night a couple years ago. And then, of course, last year, the LA Rams game. And none of these games have been in January or in September. These are all November, December games, mostly November. Those are the games that have prevented the Bills from being a 1 seed or being a higher seed in the playoffs, getting home field against the Chiefs. So having Josh Allen ready to go, or whoever else ready to go, this is also a Khalil Shakir conversation if you want, for week 1, I think is wildly overrated. You need these guys ready for weeks 10 through 21. And yeah, you'd love to have the win over the Ravens. Like I said, it's a home game that could determine home field in the playoffs. You want to get those. But if you're not ready to go, if the price of Josh Allen sitting in the preseason is that he's a little less ready to go in September, I'm okay to pay that price because the reward is making sure that he doesn't sustain some sort of injury that prevents him from being available throughout most of the season. I'm fine with that. Because as the Bills have proven, the last 4 seasons, the big games for them are not the ones against the great teams. It's the dumb ones that they dump in November and December. So if the Bills have to protect Josh Allen or Khalil Shakir or anyone else for week 1 or week 2 or in the preseason to make sure that the rest of the season is exactly where you want it to be, I think that's the right play. I think that's the right bet. And none of this means that Josh Allen won't be ready to go for week one. It's Josh bleeping Allen. I mean, the guy knows the offense, knows the league. There's no growing pains at all. Runs the offense as well as anyone. I mean, great when it comes to the mental part of the game. There's no reason to expect he can't roll out on the field for week one against the Ravens and put up a plenty good enough performance to win. Again, you want to go back to the Bills' playoff performance. The biggest problem for the Bills in those big games has not been 17. It's been other stuff. And the Trey White injury kind of underlines some of the problems the Bills might have with the other stuff. So, yeah, is there concern the Bills might not be ready for week one against Baltimore? Sure. Let me tell you, that's a bad draw for Buffalo off the bat anyway. Because if I'm the Ravens, I have been stewing over that postseason loss all offseason. And when the NFL laid out, a meatball to me on a platter with giving me a trip back to Buffalo, the scene of the crime, for week one, I think the Ravens will have no problem finding motivation all through the offseason, and I think they will be ready for bear for that opener. Doesn't mean they'll win. They had a similar situation last year with the Chiefs, ended up losing the game. Regardless, of all the spots on the schedule to drop the Ravens game for Buffalo, week one was probably the worst. Regardless, I don't mind Josh Allen not playing in the preseason. I think it's the right call. Keep that guy safe. Keep that guy under bubble wrap if you want until you really need him for the real games. And if he's not 100% ready to go, you live with the consequences. Because the consequences of risking him in the preseason, to me, are greater. Even if, both levels of consequences are pretty small. I mean, even if he plays in the preseason, it's going to be like a dozen snaps. The chances of him getting hurt there are pretty low. But similarly, the chances of him being not ready to go for the Ravens, probably equally low. Keon Coleman had another highlight play in practice today. He's had a pretty good week of practice. Had a nice couple of plays at the end of practice on Tuesday, yesterday on Wednesday, multiple good plays, and was reportedly really good in the joint practice in Chicago. So this is now, 4 practices in a row that have been on the plus side for Keon Coleman. No small thing. This is a guy that throughout his career so far, definitely in last year's training camp, most of this year's training camp, it's been up and down. Good day, bad day, good day, bad day, bad day, bad day, good day, that kind of thing. For him to string together a few nice practices has been a welcome change of pace for number 0. And yesterday on Wednesday, there were a couple different comments about the way Keon has grown. One of the ones I enjoyed the most was from offensive coordinator Joe Brady, who said that Keon, last year might have been afraid of the starting quarterback. This year, he's not afraid to tell Josh Allen when he's throwing a bad ball. So Keon has now reached the point where he can tell truth to power. Now, Keon did say later, by the way, that Josh Allen. So 9 out of 10 balls are good. So I'm not really saying much to him. But regardless, that is growth. And then on top of that, Deion Dawkins, who spoke to the media later, had his own comments about Keon Coleman that I thought were very interesting.
It is night and day, or sunny day and a storm, if you want to put it in any way. Keon is not the same player from last year. So the league better get ready. He is not the same guy. And as a teammate, I am so glad that he picked it up so early, because he is not the same player. And I'm just glad that Josh has him, as well as the Buffalo Bills, because Keon has showed up in every bit of where we needed him to show up at, from training camp to being on time to checking into dinner to checking into lunch to being available. He's been a fully changed Keon.
Let's talk about some of the things that Deion had to say there, some of the specific things that stood out to me. Deion said that Keon has showed up. He showed up to training camp. He's been on time. He's checking into dinner and lunch. And he's being available. These are not the things that you associate with all-pro NFL receivers. These are not things that you put high on the list of distinguishing characteristics from guys who are the best receivers in the NFL. These are things that everybody should do. Being on time, showing up for meals, being available. I mean, this is the basics, right? This isn't wow, look at what this guy's done. This is what you should be, or what we think you should be. But it doesn't mean it's not important. Because this says to me, and especially when you combine it with what Joe Brady said about Keon being afraid to talk to the quarterback this year. This shows a ton of growth and a ton of maturity. And let's not forget that these rookies are like 21-year-old kids at best coming out of college. Some are younger. Some are even 19 and 20. How many of us were mature enough to be on time, to be available when we were 21? I know I had my issues. So, yeah, there's a number of rookies who do it the right way. You hear about the intangibles, what kind of people they've been, how good they are in the combine interview. And yeah, so there's a number of guys that are good that first year, that do all the things they're supposed to do. I'm sure there are a number that don't. And it appears, reading between the lines here from what Joe Brady and especially Deion Dawkins said, that Keon wasn't that guy last year, that he wasn't on time, that he wasn't showing up for things he was supposed to. Now, I'm not going to excuse him for that, but again, he's a kid. I think we forget that too much. We look at a name on a fantasy list and think they should all be the same. They should all be responsible. These are people with all kinds of different strengths and weaknesses and learning curves and, needs and abilities. So the fact that Deion Dawkins is talking about Keon Coleman as a guy that's figured all that stuff out to the level where he starts out by saying it's night and day. Yeah, it might be bad about what Keon was last year, but who cares? Last year's last year. This year, the guy's figured it out. The guy's here. He's available. He's doing the right things. It's a big step. It's not nothing, for sure. And I think the Bills have the right to be gushing about Keon in this way. Now, look, to this point, media have been allowed to see all the practices. So we don't see what Keon is doing off the field. We don't see the on time to meetings. We don't see the being available, showing up to lunch and dinner. But we do see him on the field. And on the field, he's been better, but not a guy that I'd put in the category of breakout is imminent. It could happen. And the last few days have certainly ticked up that meter a little bit to where you think maybe there's more of a light bulb going on than just being on time to lunch. But clearly behind the scenes, there's been growth. And big-time growth to where Deion Dawkins wants to pump his teammate up. So take note of that. That is a nice piece of improvement. I don't know if it'll lead to Keon being a whole different player on the field. And I think that when he was drafted, we probably all should have understood more that the growth curve for Keon Coleman was going to be longer than most other guys. This is not a player that was just going to suddenly get it, that it might take 2 or 3 years. But if you're looking for growth from Keon Coleman, and I'll tell you, I don't see a ton of it on the field. Some, you're seeing a lot of it off the field. And I think Bills fans should be excited about that. Again, does it lead to a big-time improvement when the season starts? I don't know. Maybe. I think in an offense, too, where the goal is everybody eats, I think it'll be hard for anybody to really have a breakout. I mean, you're going to have to really be an elite level, overwhelming. For Joe Brady to go against or go away from what's been working for them, the phrase that he loves, that the Bills have embraced, the whole everybody eats, we don't need a number one receiver idea, you're going to have to be a blatantly, unavoidably good receiver to where you have to throw the ball to this guy all the time. I was talking with a fantasy football reporter, Michael F. Florio, about, where I look at the Bills receivers in terms of fantasy value and things like that. And whereas Keon Coleman, I think is, if you have a league that is heavily scoring with touchdowns, Keon Coleman's the guy you want to take. I think he's going to be effective in the red zone. I think he's going to be used in the red zone. I think that, it wouldn't stun me if Keon Coleman led the Bills in receiving touchdowns this year. Not at all. And maybe by a lot too. But if you're going to be in a PPR league, points per reception, I think Josh Palmer is more likely to be your guy, or Khalil Shakir. I don't know if Keon Coleman's going to get the between the 20s looks that those other guys are going to get. But in the end zone, in the red zone, with his size and his ability to be open when you're not open, and the way the Bills have used him in training camp, wouldn't stun me at all if Keon Coleman, was the touchdown reception leader for this team. And who knows, maybe there will be more of a breakout this season. Maybe, this development, what he's done off the field, what we've seen lately is just the beginning. You never know. And that's the other thing about, football. It's a long season. There are a number of guys who will be one way in week 1 and a whole different way by week 15. And it goes both directions too. You can go from good to bad and bad to good. So Where Keon is right now doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the very same player when we get to December or even October for that matter. But I think the comments and certainly the last couple practices he's had are very much encouraging from the Bills' point of view and for Bills fans too. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, big news in racing, certainly in Western New York. NASCAR dropped their schedule yesterday, and Watkins Glen being the race here in upstate Western New York, this part of the area, a big move that I think a lot of people, a lot of racing fans are very unhappy about. I'm going to bring in John Kutchko. You know him, you love him. From News 8, John Kutchko Digital, all kinds of things. His Facebook posts, his Instagram posts, he's everywhere. He's got a great history when it comes to NASCAR in this area. We're going to have a conversation with him right after this. You're watching the Endgame on Rochester First. Remember the kids, they all call it Rock One. How's it going? Thad Brown with you on the Endgame. We've switched the lights here to black and white, or the closest to black and white that I can get. Because we're talking racing, everybody. Checkered flag. NASCAR unveiled their schedule for 2026 yesterday, and some of this was rumored for a while. This is not a shock, I think, in general, but the official announcement makes it a real thing. So NASCAR every year kind of, reinvents its schedule. They're looking for the best ratings. It's not obviously a track or an event that's been doing the best numbers wise. It's still very much, something that a lot of people talk about, very much people are into. So one of the unique things about NASCAR too is that lately they've been going to more and more road tracks. This to me has been the Drive to Survive reaction for NASCAR, that the famous Netflix series on Formula One with all of its road courses kind of prompted NASCAR to say, well, maybe if we don't do a circle every week, people will like us more. So this year they've got 6 road tracks on the schedule. After it wasn't 10 years ago, they only did 2. It was Watkins Glen and Sonoma out in California. So Watkins Glen, from that point of view, seems to have a little better foothold in NASCAR. The road track the road course is much more popular. Watkins Glen is the oldest and I think most historic, most traditional road course on the NASCAR circuit. So you think Watkins Glen would be in a better position. But we find out yesterday from the schedule being dropped that the race is going from August to May. You don't have to be a racing expert to understand why that would be a problem in Western New York. So I caught up with John Kutchko, someone who was a sports director at WRC in Rochester here for 20 odd years. I should know the number. He retired from the business in 2 or 3 years ago, left as sports director in 2016. He's still very much involved in the media. I think if you have a Facebook page and you are interested in pictures and naturescapes, you will see John Kutchko Digital at some point. But he's still someone that is very well connected when it comes to the southern tier of New York, the economics there, the tourist attractions there, what draws people to that Finger Lakes region, and how that Finger Lakes region, stays economically viable. And I guarantee that although wineries and just the summer views and the lakes are a big part of that, so is NASCAR and that race in Watkins Glen. So I wanted to catch up with John and get his take on the schedule change from August to May and how that might impact what goes on there in the southern tier of New York.
So just give me your reaction to the first time you heard the news. I don't know if the first time was yesterday when it was announced. I know it's something that was rumored, but when it was digested, this is when the Glen was going to race or when the Glen was going to host NASCAR. What do you think?
Yeah, I wasn't a fan. I heard about it yesterday, and 2 things immediately came to mind. First and foremost, not the weather necessarily, but Mother's Day. That's a big issue for a lot of people. And so I immediately thought of the poor timing with that. And then secondarily, the weather situation. Now, do I expect it to snow on May 10th? No, I don't. However, what a lot of people are not talking about is the ground throughout the Finger Lakes is saturated in early May. I know that because I'm probably in the Finger Lakes more than anybody with my cameras, and especially that time of year between winter snow melt and spring rain runoff and everything else. The grounds at the track will be saturated. The grounds at Watkins Glen State Park will be saturated. Heck, the park mostly isn't even open till later in May. And so a lot of people go to Watkins Glen to camp who attend that race, like thousands of people. And so I don't think they factored any of that in this decision, to be honest with you.
Talk about the camping part of it more because, like you said, yeah, Mother's Day being the day of the cup race is one thing, but it's not just the cup race, it's the Xfinity, it's the trucks, it's qualifying. Like you said, people get there on Thursday night and stay for the whole weekend, separate of what the ground is going to be like. How much less likely is Watkins Glen going to be attracting tourists in the middle of May, where school is still in session, things are still going on, as opposed to August, which is the middle of summer, the heart of vacation season around here?
Yeah, it's an epic fail from that standpoint. I mean, I did a post last night just kind of going off on this, and it reached a lot of people. And I think I got like 2,200 comments on the thing. And a lot of them were, we are simply not renewing our tickets for next year because they have kids. To your point, they're in school. I can tell you the wineries in early May are not in tourism mode. I mean, the whole thing just it's not pleasant. I understand some of what NASCAR is doing, shuffling the schedule. I don't pay attention to it like I did back in my sports days, obviously, but I did pretty much cover 25, 30 years of races there, beginning in 1987, which was the second year, I believe, that NASCAR raced there. I think they began in 86. And, I just, the sport has gone downhill in my view ever since Dale Earnhardt passed at Daytona, and the ratings from or lack thereof reflect that. I think you see a lot of empty seats at these venues, including Watkins Glen. But Watkins Glen traditionally has pretty good crowds in August, and especially this year's race. I did check on it. The race was horribly boring. I watched like the last 20 laps or so, and it was almost unwatchable. But they had a decent number of people there. And August, they're so entrenched with that, decades and decades of that being a fixture on the calendar. People plan their entire summers or vacations around it. Not just New York State, people from Pennsylvania, people from the New England states, people from Ohio. I mean, this is the Northeast we're talking about. And it's an abrupt move. And then you throw in the whole weather concern. And there are concerns. I mean, Thad, 5 years ago, I shot 2 to 3 inches of snow down in the southern tier on May 9th. And I did post a picture on that in my comments to my post last night on my page. So, and it got a lot of reaction. It can do that around these parts. Now, it hasn't lately, but we know better. And so, I was really stunned that they made this move. And I kind of liken it to what the LPGA in a different form did when they pulled out of Rochester in Corning and the smaller communities that supported that circuit forever in hopes that the bigger markets would bring great returns to them, and it simply did not happen. And now the LPGA is barely a blip on anyone's radar.
One of the reasons I want to talk to you is because, to your point, you did cover this extensively a while ago. And there was a point not that long ago when NASCAR even coming to the Glen at all was a question. And that's one of the things I thought about with this yesterday, that the era of the Glen begging NASCAR, what seemed like begging NASCAR to still be there, is not so far removed to where I can almost understand the Glen agreeing to this date, because there might still be some feeling that it's either this or nothing, and this is still way better than nothing. Kind of paint a picture about what that was like back then and how you think that might be affecting the thinking now with the Glen agreeing to going back to May.
Well, I think the Glen had no choice. They were going to take what was given them, period. Look, the heyday of the sport was in the early 90s, in the days of Dale Sr., the Intimidator, the grassroots drivers, Rusty Wallace, Mark Martin, a brash Jeff Gordon coming onto the scene and dominating for years. You had characters, Tony Stewart, you go on, the Petties. You don't have that anymore. You just simply don't have that anymore. And so, back in those days, the number that they kept talking about as far as attendance was about 125 to 150,000 at the track, which was believable. Anyone who covered a race in the late 80s or early 90s, and I know you, when you worked in Binghamton, probably were there a time or two, traffic getting in and out of there was a nightmare. Even when we left 3-4 hours after the race, it was a nightmare, worse than a Bills game. I don't think that's the case anymore. And so that's reflective of the dwindling numbers as far as attendance. I think NASCAR probably told Watkins Glen, this is the date, you're going to be happy with it, and they moved on. But I don't think the sport gave much thought as to all the campers, and I keep going back to the campers. It's a few thousand people that camp either at the state park or on the grounds of the track. And It's going to be all mud, whether they have rain that week or not. Just because of late April into early May is always rain soaked as far as the ground saturation is in that region.
You're as connected with this region as anyone, and certainly the expertise in NASCAR is a big part of this too. Give me the long-term result of this. Let's say NASCAR says this is going to be the date forever. Can Watkins Glen afford, whether you're talking about the track or the region, afford to continue to have one of their best tourist events in what is probably a bad date? And will there come a point where maybe the juice is no longer worth the squeeze, where if NASCAR says this or nothing, the Glen would consider nothing?
I would hate to think that would happen. The Glen will always be that iconic road course. They can draw other circuits there, but we know what's happened with that over the years. Look at with the Indy League. I mean, I went to 2 or 3 of those races and they were horrible. I mean, there's no energy. There was no excitement there whatsoever. And this is back when IRL, I think Danica was maybe driving at that point. I can't remember, but I'm just telling you, uh, it's just bizarre. It's been a rough year for the Glen. They were supposed to have a big wine festival at the track, and it got canceled like 2 or 3 weeks out. And that was supposed to be at the track, and no explanation was really given for that. And then we get news of this yesterday. Watkins Glen will always be an appealing region for the natural beauty, first and foremost. Long before F1 raced at that iconic road course, and long before they raced in the streets and the hilltops of the Finger Lakes area down in Watkins Glen, they had the natural beauty. And that's what draws people from far and wide, from people across New York State, America, and across the world. They go there to see the natural beauty and other areas, Ithaca, other areas in New York State and our parts. But the racing has been woven into the fabric of that community for a very long time now. And big picture, I don't expect NASCAR to be racing there maybe 6-7 years from now. I think they'll be gone. But I think the sport's got bigger problems. I think they are trying anything they can to be relevant again. And this may be just, putting that street course in San Diego. That to me says they're just trying to do anything they can to get some buzz. We'll see what happens.
It is weird too that there seemed to be a further embrace of road courses and the NASCAR rotation than there was 15 years ago when Watkins Glen was again scratching and clawing to be a part of this, and pushing Watkins Glen, one of those road courses that has been there forever, to a date that's very obviously not good for them, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. John Kutchko Digital, go ahead.
Yeah.
You can.
Well, I was just going to say, they used to say back in the day that, it's good to have presence in the Northeast market. They were in the Poconos and they were at Watkins Glen and they were in New Hampshire. And, Watkins Glen, New York, you're only 3 hours from Philadelphia, 3.5 hours from New York City, 5 hours from Boston. You and I both know we between us did a lot of races there. And usually back in the day, we were the only station there. You had to fight to get the Syracuse stations there on a couple of those summers. So that really didn't pan out well for NASCAR as far as their mindset was, being in that Northeast New York market in the heart of the Finger Lakes. I don't know. I think this is a bad move all around. And by the way, it's Mother's Day of all days. Not good.
We spent 10 minutes on this, didn't even talk about that once. John Kutchko Digital. You can catch him on Facebook, Instagram, lots of other places. Thanks for checking in, man. I appreciate it. Won't be the last time you're on this show.
Keep up the good work, Thad.
Thanks, man.
There you go. John, I think did a good job breaking it down there. Didn't even get into the Mother's Day thing as I was introducing it. And yeah, this is a big part of it. Mother's Day obviously is such a big part of everyone's lives. Mom gets to do whatever she wants. And not to say that mom is not a racing fan. I'm sure plenty of moms are. But that's just in the way, and NASCAR for years never raced on Mother's Day. Now, it wasn't necessarily an economics thing. I think NASCAR avoided Easter and Mother's Day, out of respect. It's more of an old school traditional value type sport. But regardless, Mother's Day for a long time was not a Sunday they raced on. Now, the last few years they have raced on it, and I think, NASCAR may be somewhat being driven by need, desperation, having to find new streams of revenue, has opened that day back up to racing, and, they will do it for the 5th year in a row next year. But that's only the 13th time ever NASCAR has raced on Mother's Day. Regardless, look, for Watkins Glen and for racing fans in this region, it's a bad break. It is a bad beat to have your event, the thing that you might plan your whole summer around, or certainly a big part of it, being pushed back to May. We had this discussion in Rochester when it came to moving the PGA Championship from August to May. That's a little different deal. You don't have generally people camping out for the week at Oak Hill. They don't, take very kindly to those kind of things. So it's not quite the same experience, probably not even close in a lot of ways. This, I think, will be more difficult. And John bringing up the point about what the grounds will be like. I mean, August and May are not even the same planet in Western New York, let alone, the same kind of camping conditions. So bad beat for Watkins Glen, rough break for this area. We'll see how long this lasts. Look, NASCAR has bounced around its schedule a lot. Watkins Glen was August this year, or September the year before that. That had never happened before. So maybe this will be a one-time thing. But either way, I can understand why racing fans are a little frustrated with the way that whole schedule thing went down. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, some final thoughts today. Wrap it up. Get you ready for Bills and Bucks on Saturday. The end of the preseason is near. Hallelujah. The Endgame is back right after this. You're watching right here on Rochester First. Thad Brown back here with you on the Endgame, wrapping it up on a Thursday. Bills getting ready to take on the Bucks in their preseason finale. I'm sure you heard this week that Gabe Davis, old buddy, back in Buffalo for a visit, and got a lot of people talking about what the Bills should do at receiver. Would Gabe Davis help? Look, they've got a nice stable of professional receivers that really don't scare anybody for the most part. And Gabe Davis, I think, would just be another one of those. Now, look, this is a guy that's had plenty of success in Buffalo, and there's no reason to think that he can't, roll right back into this offense and fit in. He's never been a part of the everybody eats offense, but, he's obviously not a number one type that would rock that boat anyway. And he's really, I think, as much as fans have kind of gotten on him over the years, he really is a good teammate and a guy that would fit in. And a guy that would do some of the dirty work, too. Remember, Matt Collins is off this team. And for years, the Bills, whether it be Hollins or Gabe Davis or even Jake Kumaro, they've had a receiver that can be a pretty darn good blocker in the run game. And they don't have that right now on the roster. Keon Coleman is probably the best version of that. And early in preseason, when Keon Coleman was struggling as a receiver, I wondered if his role this year might just be, I'm going to be the blocker extraordinaire, do the Gabe Davis, Matt Collins work, and if he can develop through the season as a receiver, great. But lately, and especially what we talked about earlier in the show, where Keon has improved, you wonder if Coleman now has better secured a role as much more of a receiving threat. Whole different discussion. When it comes to Gabe Davis, how does he fit on this roster? That's a big question to me. Because if you're going to be the fourth, fifth, sixth receiver, well, you better be able to play special teams. Under Sean McDermott, at least one receiver has had 90-plus special team snaps every year, and not as a return man, in the coverage blocking parts of special teams. Well, Gabe Davis has virtually never played special teams, certainly not his last 3 seasons in the NFL. He's got 7 snaps total on special teams. And if you look at the rest of the Bills receivers, Elijah Moore, not a special teamer. Curtis Samuel, not a special teamer. Khalil Shakir is a return man. He's not playing special teams. And certainly not Keon Coleman either. So usually the Bills have one of those guys to do that. Now, Tyrell Shavers, hard worker fighting for a roster spot, he would seem to be the candidate to be that receiver this year. Low on the depth chart, doing some team stuff, helping out when he can. The guy's made some plays. He's had a good enough camp to think that he's worthy of a roster spot. I don't think anybody in the world would, bat an eyelash at Tyrell Shavers getting the last receiver spot on the 53-man. And if you want to bring Gabe Davis in to improve on Tyrell Shavers, I get that. But that's what you're doing. You're not really opening things up for anybody else. And if you bring Gabe Davis in, does he then take some of those receiver snaps to be that blocker? And if he's doing that, what do we do with Keon Coleman? And you can move him inside the slot. He's better there. But the Bills already have Khalil Shakir to play in the slot. They have at least one of Curtis Samuel and Elijah Moore to play in the slot. Dalton Kincaid is better in the slot. So this team, makes a little more sense functionally right now with Keon on the outside, with Josh Palmer and Shakir as the starter. And then you use Elijah Moore and Samuel as backups. Maybe one of those guys plays outside a little bit. And Shavers is the primary outside receiver backup, also being the guy that participates on special teams. And really, you may not even keep Moore and Samuel. It might be one of the two. So where the heck does Gabe Davis fit in all that? Like, what do you do with him? Look, I understand at some point, if Gabe Davis needs a job and he's going to take this job and Buffalo wants to bring him in to be the receiver that gets scratched healthy every week or a practice squad guy, then you take that. And the familiarity that Davis has with the Bills and the system and the organization will certainly make him more amenable to that role, if it is maybe even just a practice squad role. Better to have a job than not have a job, even though I think Gabe Davis could play for easily a half dozen teams in the NFL. I mean, the Steelers, I don't know why they haven't signed him already. Now, Davis is coming off an injury. That's a good chance it's a part of it. But again, at some level, if you're a professional football player, the point is to have a job, and Gabe Davis is going to need a job. And in Buffalo, we're talking about all the receiving core healthy. Trey White and Max Harrison have reminded us that's not how the roster is going to stay all year. So if you're Gabe Davis, maybe you take a job in Buffalo thinking, I'm going to sit here for now, but if someone in front of me gets hurt, I know exactly what I'm going to do. It's going to be a great role for me. I'll step right in and be productive. And even before that, I know this team needs me as a blocker, so I'm going to at least be on the field. So there are reasons that Gabe Davis would be attracted to the Bills. I just don't see the fit when it comes to the Bills being attracted to Gabe Davis. It just feels like a piece that the Bills don't really need that badly. But we'll see. This time of year too, you keep tabs on guys, you keep in contact, how you look, how's the rehab going, are you healthy enough? Maybe the Bills don't add him, but he stays right at the top of the list in case there's a Palmer, Keon, even a Tyrell Shavers injury. So we'll see. But I just don't think Gabe Davis is an impact guy. I don't think he's a guy that's probably going to be a fit on this football team going forward. Going to be a weird preseason game. I don't know if there's a ton of position battles I'm really dying to see. Obviously the corner situation is totally in flux now. If Trey White is not ready to answer the bell for week one, is Jamarcus Ingram, is Brandon Codrington even, in the discussion for making one of those last corner spots? Maybe some battle at linebacker. Joe Andreessen's pretty much the only middle backup right now. I think Shaq Thompson could do it, but I don't know if the Bills want him to. Does Joe Andreessen need to play a little better than he did on Sunday? Sean McDermott said that it wasn't Joe Andreessen's best night. Does he need a game to secure a roster spot? And we just talked about the wide receiver group. Does Tyrell Shavers need a game to make this team? Is there a battle between Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel? I would say that Elijah Moore needs to make himself indispensable as opposed to fighting with anybody else for a roster spot. He needs to prove that he's so good or good enough that the Bills don't want to go without him. And I don't know if he's there. I think he's very much on the bubble. But that might be about it. I mean, quarterback is set, running back is set. I'm sure there's some discussion at the bottom of the offensive line. Is Tylen Grable going to be good enough to answer the bell with the injuries he's dealt with in the preseason? Concussion and everything. Do you keep him on the roster? Sean McDermott talked today about the potential of putting Cedric Van Pran Granger on the PUP list to start the season. He's been hurt most of the preseason. So if you do that, who's your backup center? Alec Anderson is taking some snaps at that. You've got guys like Jacob Bayer, Dan Feeney, who just came in, who could be that role. But this is what we're talking about. And this is, I say this with preseason. Preseason is about the bottom 20 or 25 guys on the roster. The regular season, it's about the top 30. And we're really close to moving the conversation from that bottom 25 to the top 30. But one more weekend of that coming up on Saturday with the preseason finale. One more thing I want to throw out there real quick. So a big soccer fan, big professional soccer fan. And I don't know how many of you out there are into professional soccer, but I know a lot of you out there are into Ryan Reynolds. And he, as I'm sure many know, along with Rob McElhenney from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, they co-own a professional English soccer club called Wrexham. Now, the short backstory on Wrexham is that they were in the 5th level of English football, English soccer. So the Premier League that you hear about, Manchester United, Chelsea, all them, that's the top level. Then there's the Championship, then there's League One, there's League Two, and then there's the National League, what they were in. Semi-pro, too. Not even totally professional, okay? So they were at the bottom of the barrel of English soccer. In the last 3 years, they've played well enough to get promoted up a level each year from the National League to League Two, then to League One, and then this year they're the championship. So they've gone from the 5th level to the 2nd level in 3 seasons. It is the first English soccer club ever, or at least in like recorded modern history, that's gotten 3 straight promotions in 3 years. It's unheard of. And you know, for American sports fans that don't understand promotion, relegation, I mean, you know what the words mean, but in terms of the emotional connection to it, when you get promoted a league, it's better than winning a championship. I mean, think about in the NFL. If you are the best that year, obviously you're the best in the world. That's great. But imagine not just being the best, but being so good that you don't have to be in that league the next season. You get to go up to the next one. That's what happens in English football. It's fantastic. It's awesome. You know, and obviously relegation is the opposite of that. The reason I bring this all up is there's a story today about Wrexham signing a player who used to be with Manchester City, who's in the Premier League, spent a whole bunch of money, and they've already broken their record for the amount of money they spend in an offseason. So the way soccer kind of exchanges players, they don't really do trades. Basically, if you have a contract to play for me and you want my guy, you got to pay me for the guy. And then I get the money, you get the player, and then I can spend the money on somebody else if I want. And you don't have to do this within players in your own league. You can go up levels. I can have a player in Spain and give him to a team in England. Then a player from England can go to a player in France or go to a team in France. That's how it works. Wrexham has spent a ton of money to bring players in over the last few years. And this year they broke their own record for transfer money. I used to really love this story. I was interested in Wrexham, rooting for them. There's a documentary on FX you can watch. Welcome to Wrexham. Very well done, entertaining. But the problem I've had with it is that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, having all this entertainment money, all this movie and TV money, has been able to basically rig the system. What they have done the last few years is just gone out and spend gobs of money, more than most teams in their own leagues can keep up with, to sign players that would normally be playing in levels above the level where they're at. The best comparison I can give you is imagine a team playing single A baseball, Batavia, back in the day when they had a team, suddenly having the Yankees budget. You wouldn't sign Aaron Judge right away, but if you wanted to sign a bunch of AAA and AA players, I bet you win a championship there. And then when you went up to AA, if you wanted to sign a bunch of AAA and Major League players, not great ones, maybe older ones that still want to play in the game, or guys that need another chance, or players that might have been on the bubble to, you know, have a part-time role in the majors, but wants to make the same money and have a full-time role down in AA. Well, these are the kind of guys that they're signing at Wrexham. And this year, with this most recent signing, the player's name is Callum Doyle, if you care, Wrexham has blown away their own record for the amount of money they've spent in an offseason. And as much fun as it is to see this little city, you know, Wrexham is not a big town. This is like Utica playing in the major leagues, okay? It's a fun story, but when you understand how they do it and how they basically just, there's no rules. They're not breaking any rules, but it kind of feels a little dirty the way that they're taking this underdog story and turning it into a big-time major league club or close to that. And it's still, now, I don't root for it as much as I used to. I don't really watch the documentary much anymore because it's hard to get excited about all the hard work they're doing behind the scenes. And it's not just as easy as you sign the expensive players and you win. There certainly is work that goes into it to build a team, win games, but it's a big bleeping advantage. So, you know, if you see Wrexham and the story around them and want to know what's going on with them, they're very successful. And I'm sure the people who live there are super appreciative of what Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have brought to their little town. But the idea that it's some great underdog story that I think sports fans get excited about, I really kind of roll my eyes at it these days. And it's stuff like this that's a part of it. You know, the amount of money you spend, when you spend so much money to make it hard to lose, it's hard for me to get excited when you win. Kind of like preseason, right? All right, we're out of here. Thanks for watching the Endgame. We'll be back on Monday. I'm sure we'll talk about what's going on with Trey White, how the preseason finale went, where the Bills are at, and we'll finally get to look forward to the regular season. Not quite yet. We got to talk about final cuts on Tuesday, but at least the preseason will be over next time I'm with you. Thanks for watching the Endgame here on Rochester First. Remember, the kids all call it Rock One. Call it Rock One yourself, but make sure you download it too. We'll see you again on Monday.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 on demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.